Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you today. We've got a lot to talk about here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. But first, I want you to go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe there. Like and subscribe. Hey, Andre, like and subscribe, and get together with my morning stars so you can participate in this conversation. And go to the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. That's the only page where I can accept friends. So please, the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. Don't go to the landing page. Maybe if you try to become my friend on Santita Jackson, but I can't accept any friends and they keep kicking people off. Please go to the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. But because so many of you have been reaching out, Facebook has contacted me and they've asked me repeatedly to ask you to please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Facebook is like the landing mechanism. And then they want everyone to go over to YouTube. They're really trying to promote it. It's almost becoming like a new network, right? And so please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. And we're streaming on X on at Santita J, at Santita J. I'm sharing it with this man I know. His name is Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm sharing it with his with his page also. But at Santita J and the Santita J Show. So let's get to it. We've got a lot to talk about in these couple hours. So in the second hour, we will talk about what else? President Trump's appearance at the National Association of Black Journalists. When he was offered the invitation, he readily accepted. And it's very interesting as a television and radio host and producer, the people to whom you have almost immediate access. And they've been very interesting and they've been very intentional since they came out. The Trump team came out. They wanted to see, touch, and feel the Black community. Now, and they haven't altered their message. They are who they are when they get to you. And there you have it. And it was a very interesting event. A lot of the NABJ came under a lot of criticism, but they invited them, and I think they should have because they're journalists. They should do that. But they also many journalists who were there were not there in the room, but many were. So we're going to talk to people who are veterans of the NABJ and talk to them about what they saw, what they observed, why they were there, why they were not there, and what the role of a journalist is, particularly a Black journalist. Yeah, because everybody's got a mission. You know, what is the mission of Black journalists? And how do you keep your integrity personally, professionally? And to all the people who marched and fought for you to get those jobs, how does that work out? So, but first, let's talk about Africa. These are the issues that are before us in the election 2024 cycle. That's right. You know, we are talking about the Middle East, and we should. We've been in solidarity with our brothers and sisters, in particular in Palestine, for decades. For decades, it has been a frontline issue in the Black American civil rights community, and quite frankly, throughout the diaspora, ever since 1947, if not before. Because you have a lot of Black Palestinians too. So there's a lot going on, everybody. But we dance around Africa, and what's interesting to me is that I've been going to the continent since I was about 7. And almost always, well, no, always, we're about the only Blacks on the plane. And whenever my father, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, would come on the plane, you would feel a chill settle over, excuse me, Netfa Freeman, the plane. Excuse me, eventually they would come and they'd ask, what is he doing here? What is he doing here? What are you doing here? And they were all, yeah, without fail. And it would make them very uncomfortable. And so we need to talk about what Africa means. They have got tremendous wealth. Even when you look at the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, when you look at what they call the investable wealth in Africa, they only have it at $2.5 trillion. That is absolutely untrue. They have untold riches there. Excuse me, so much of what we use, Firestone rubber, comes out of Africa. The the components for your mobile phone and your computers, they come out of Africa. There is just so much there. And there's always been a rush to grab Africa. And now Africa is fighting another Cold War over there, trying to keep Russia at bay. But Russia has been at Africa participating in their freedom movements for decades. Let's talk about this. That's, Africa is why I said that Ukraine was not going to become a world conflict. I said they will never get this. Africa, India, they're not going to sign on for this. They have another relationship with Putin. So let's talk about this rush for Africa. I love the Black Agenda Report. And when I got this headline yesterday, I said, oh, we got to talk about this today. The ruthless and desperate pursuit of U.S. influence and access over Africa. Written by the brilliant Netfa Freeman. I want you to check him out on his WPFW radio show. He has a podcast. It is Voices with Vision. Voices with Vision. I first met you many years ago with the Institute for Policy Studies, but of course, you're an organizer in the Pan-African Community Action Project and the co-coordinator of the Black Alliance for Peace Africa team. Welcome, welcome, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Freeman. Thank you, Santita. Thank you for having me.
When can we hear your radio show? I got to take care of that. I told you I'm going to bug you about that.
So we're a weekly show that comes on Tuesday morning from 9 to 10 a.m. on WPFW 89.3 FM. It's a DC show in the DC affiliate of the Pacifica Foundation. But it's also a podcast, so they put the public affairs shows on podcasts on things like iTunes or Player FM or a number of stuff. Sometimes podcasts I don't even know about, but if you just search the web for Voices with Vision WPFW, they'll come up.
It is an age thing. I'm not mad at you, but podcasts are real. That's fun. Mm-hmm. This is a tremendous article. Let me say hello to Ashley King down in Memphis, Andre here in Chicago, my godbrother Dave Dowling, and we've got Regina Hill. How you doing, sweetie, out there in San Francisco, getting up with us real early. Shirley from beautiful, beautiful, beautiful Philadelphia. Dave Dowling up there in Canada. Janae, love, how you doing? Sending you so much love today. Let's talk about Africa and what it means and why America is making this grab for Africa. I wonder if it's too late. I remember my father going and seeing the OAU's headquarters years ago, NEFA. He said, boy, America missed the bus on this one. I said, why? He said, if you see the investments that China is making in Africa, when you see the OAU headquarters makes the United Nations look like kindergarten next to a major university. But that's fitting because it's the largest continent and it's the richest. So talk to us about this influence that America is seeking. And you opened the article this way. On June 25th, the U.S. Africa Command, which is AFRICOM, which is something that Gaddafi fiercely opposed, but the Liberian president was going to let them in, but the African leadership following him said, don't you dare. And so there we go. Up until his death, we didn't have them there. But now they are, and they convened the African Chiefs of Defense Conference in Botswana, which is just above South Africa, everybody. The conference purportedly to, quote, strategize on counterterrorism, collaborate on crisis response, and the importance of civilian and military relations, has been held since 2017. And you said this is the first time it's been held in Africa. Typically, it's held in Europe. And I guess that's telling. So let's start there, because I have a lot of questions to ask you about these different players who you mentioned, because we should know who they are. What is this? What is the significance of this conference? What are they trying to do? And what is AFRICOM seeking to counter this Russian disinformation specifically?
Mm-hmm. So maybe it's good to start with a little history primer, and then as you already mentioned, you seem to know quite a bit about it already yourself. But you mentioned that the African leaders, when it was first created, were against it, and so they were trying to. The AFRICOM's origins go back to 2007. The U.S. Africa Command. Now the United States has other military command centers, have had them all around the world for quite a long time. The Euro, I can't remember how they call it, Euro Command, the Indo-Pacific, the Southcom, and
Mhm.
Indo-Pacific Command is what they call it, or Indocom. And then, but AFRICOM is, I think, is the latest one. And when it started, the Bush administration tried to launch it in 2007, toward the end of 2007. It didn't fly with the African countries. They were already like, no, this is not something, that we want. I think it was a lot of the leadership we know is primarily uh, neo-colonial leadership, but it was just the fact that it was George Bush that didn't, and apparently that had to be it. There was
Mhm.
George Bush, because when Obama came into office in 2008, that's when it proliferated around the continent.
Is
Um,
that interesting?
as yeah, it was all, and so now AFRICOM, which is really, we have to explain and make sure people understand. AFRICOM is pretty much just the coordination of U.S. military presence and operations on the continent of Africa and all facets and aspects of it. It includes around 26 military bases in 15 countries in the African continent. And also, and this is not including what will be considered what they call, they divide these things up into enduring presence and non-enduring, and then also lily pad bases. Lily pad bases pretty much is something defined as where they really have unfettered access, pretty much unlimited access to the military bases of the country. So or at least some type of access, and some a lot of times we're pretty open, and to use and do their operations, the on and that this means also that it's in every country except for one, Eritrea. There's some form of military to military, U.S. to African military relationship on the continent of Africa. So it's all over. U.S. has the largest military footprint. After that would be France. And right now, and no, really no other countries have that kind of military footprint or any type of military presence there in that way. And there's very few places that have just African, military bases. There are some. Italy has some, and some, and that and China, they make a big thing out of China. It really has only one right now, and this is in the East Africa and in Djibouti, and that and so this is pretty much it. You read the article says, and I put in there is I can't remember the use word, ostensibly or whatever they say, whatever that words, they always have these benevolent couched words, and about why the intentions are, but it's really because right now the United States has overtaken the former colonial powers in being the top neo-colonizer on the African continent, and not just in the African continent, really in the world. The United States controls, as the top country to control, the international financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank and the World Trade Organization, and basically imposes its will in a lot of ways through dollarism and the dependence, trying to have the global economy dependent on the U.S. dollar, based on the U.S. dollar. And this is why they think anything else is such a threat. So AFRICOM, getting back to AFRICOM, in its so-called purpose of trying to fight back and trying to fight the violent extremist presence on the continent and be there for the peace and security of the continent. When this really took off in terms of their this so-called seemingly intractable presence, is when the United States, and it was the first AFRICOM operation. It was the leading NATO's operation against Libya. And that was over in 2011 when they overthrew the Libyan Jamhuriya. Now, the current commander of AFRICOM, his name is Michael Langley. He's a black person. He wasn't the first one. The first one was uh, Kip Ward, I think is the command. He was the first black commander of AFRICOM. But then you used to find him now talking very lately about Russia's presence on the continent of Africa and having to stop that, but also admitting, while they have this nice sounding language, admitting that their main mission, the mission of AFRICOM, and the purpose of U.S. presence in Africa, and you alluded to this in your opening remarks is for influence and access.
No,
And it's very
this is your headline, which is absolutely to me on point. Influence and access. Influence over whom, access to what?
hmm And its influence over all the governments and the leadership of Africa, just any the politics of Africa and the economics of Africa, that it would be against the interest of the Western powers in the United States for Africans, to be led by governments that were plotting courses of self-determination. They were trying to change, reconfigure the economic disposition so that all the raw minerals and different things in the markets were configured to work in the best interest of the masses of the people, and we're not just basically the situation in Africa because of through colonialism was they extract all these raw minerals, and many of the which you named, a lot of it is also even uranium, which is very key to this issue here, what's happening, and that they sell back finished goods. So Africa does not control. It's a main one of the main sources in the world and of raw minerals for a lot of things, basic minerals for different things, and also what they call cash crops and different things like that. The mass production of things, and then not production because they actually don't refine. That's the issue. Is not refineries and finished, but taking finished goods. When I say raw, I meant to say like a cash crop kind of thing, like for example, rubber in Liberia, where they're tapping into rubber, and Firestone owns all these plantations and whatnot. But any situation that would reverse that would make it so it's in the best interest of the U.S. is not a situation that the U.S. can tolerate, or the West in general can tolerate. The NATO countries led by the West, and so AFRICOM is there to. That's the access that they're talking about. That's the influence they want, is to make sure you don't have countries that do those kind of things, and it's quickly changing. There's emergence of countries that are doing that, and that's a threat to U.S. The role and the use of Africa toward the West, and so that's where. And then also we have to act not underestimate or underestimate, I guess, the role of the military industrial complex, because of the nature of AFRICOM and the nature of the military industrial complex. The instability and insecurity of Africa is a windfall for what really should be called the offense contractors, because that's what they're about doing, doing military operations and keeping the need for weapons and big helicopters and armaments and all kind of things. This is what they do. Security and surveillance and all those things is what they sell and offer. So as long as the comprador class, we refer to them as the comprador class, it's the neo-colonial class, the people that are served at the, not just in the government, but the elite that serve the interests of foreign powers instead of the interests of their people. That comprador class requires protection because the people don't like the situation. So then in that protection, there's surveillance, there's, all kind of making sure the armies are and the National Guards or whatever they have are there to protect them against any threat to overthrow them. And so that's a windfall and so this is also one of the situations that is beneficial for the West, is to keep Africa mired in what we would consider the forever wars. Somalia, they now drone. Somalia. There's regular drone strikes. They have a thing set. The Google alerts. You can set something so anytime something's mentioned on the internet, you can get alert about it. And so this is just AFRICOM, and I don't know how often we're hearing about some operation in Somalia that AFRICOM has decided to kill somebody and a drone strike or something, and they always couch it. And these are, primary source stuff. This comes from AFRICOM has a website. It's africom.mil, I believe, and that they always couch it first by saying with the invitation or with the support or the permission or something of the Somali government, AFRICOM just carried out this particular some operation. So they have to couch it that way, so to give them cover, to make it seem like they're not imposing the will on these countries. It's always they're being invited in. But if Africa is being dominated by neocolonialism, and you have a comprador class that's really serving the interest of the West just for trinkets in return, then you're not serving the people, the masses of the people. You're serving that comprador class, and really serving yourselves.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, who? Let's be clear on who the players are. You told us about AFRICOM, um, but now what about NATO? NATO is interesting because this was supposed to have been a 10-year experiment, right? According to General Dwight Eisenhower, and he said if it still needs to exist after 10 years, it needs to be dismantled because that means we were not successful. Um, but whenever people talk about ending NATO, well, certainly the oligarchs get very upset. That's why, it's funny because it's a funny thing to hear. Well, not, because I think he has more libertarian leanings, quite frankly. Donald Trump says get rid of NATO. People are calling him a traitor. And I'm like, but NATO is not some force for good. At least that's not my understanding. What is NATO?
Mm.
I mean, because they're based in Belgium. You get there, they're all over Brussels, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they are a big Western army. Am I kind of getting it right?
That's exactly it. I mean, and it was created under the auspices of trying to stand up against the Soviet Union at the time, and so it stands for North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So it was a
Mhm.
treaty of the various Western countries to form a military alliance, specifically a military alliance to protect the capitalist interests of the Western countries around against what they call the Soviet threat and the threat of communism. And then that's why Eisenhower's remarks was once the Soviet Union is no longer a threat, then there's no need for NATO. And it was there it was supposedly in response to the Warsaw Pact of the Soviet Union countries to come together, the countries of the Soviet Union to come together and stand. And also even in World War II and whatnot to protect their interests, protect the interests of the Soviet Union countries. Now, since then, we know NATO has not only been they didn't dismantle when the Soviet Union collapsed or was dismantled in the 80s, 1980 or 1989, I think, or so that NATO didn't go anywhere, but we know it had already started serving purposes in other countries. And beginning even in Africa, the first operation was to help the Portuguese in and beating back and stopping the revolutions in Guinea-Bissau and
Mhm.
Mozambique. The port and hoping that they're hope. And so this is the role of NATO now. It persists in order for the U.S. to exercise and maintain its what they refer to as full spectrum dominance around the world. Then they need this military force because no people will succumb or just completely submit to having their resources robbed of them and not used and used for private interests to concentrate wealth and make profits. So if the people won't accept that, then you're going to have resistance on the ground. You're going to have revolutions on the ground. You're going to have their compradors and their neocolonial puppets overthrown. And the only way to make sure that threat isn't successful is to have militaries, and they will come in and they can. If it's even if a revolution is successful, because sometimes they can't just do anything, which we're seeing right now. I hope we can talk about that in West
Mhm.
Africa, which I think we might have talked about this already, but maybe not. That they can't just they have to wait. So in other words, they keep to go. So a lot of it is PR too in the world. Um, with they have to create a pretext like they did with Libya. Libya was Gaddafi's killing his own people, all kind of stuff that we found was not true.
Say
And
that one more time. Say that again.
a lot of things that they found, everything they said was not true. Mass graves and them just killing their own people, and that there was actually a conflict on the ground with people with forces that they helped foster up. Even and one is a person that they helped. It was in the Gaddafi's the in Gaddafi. Sometimes I don't really like referring to things with base censoring individuals because things are always more complicated than that. So really, the Libyan Jamahiriya was General Khalifa Haftar, and they ended up splitting with Libya on it and fleeing the country, and then eventually ending up in the U.S. for I don't know how many years and being trained. The CIA trained him, and he was one of the leading forces that led the overthrow, the opposition on the ground, based primarily in Benghazi, that overthrew the Libyan Jamahiriya, backed by NATO forces, because they could have never done it. They could have never accomplished that without the NATO forces and the constant bombing that killed thousands of people, and including the heinous murder of Muammar Gaddafi that was put on video and everything. And then you can see that the United States has embraced that. I don't want to get too far off of my thought, but they embraced that that operation and that killing when Hillary Clinton came in and said, "We saw, we came, he died." That was the
Speaking of Gaddafi.
response to
Well, she was doing an interview, right? And
right. She was doing
came
an
to
interview.
her, they passed her a note and they said Gaddafi has been killed.
Mhm.
And what's interesting, I think people need to know, is that he was under the white flag of surrender. He was
That's right.
surrendering himself. And that is one of the things that is so horrifying. He was surrendering himself to the United States, and they killed him. And um, they, I mean, they raped him with a bayonet. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible
Yeah.
thing. And then they made him lie in state and decompose,
Mhm.
just to destroy the people. This was the most developed and wealthiest nation in Africa, and they had I think they had the top three number of gold reserves in the world. The gold reserves are gone. Some of the
Wow.
finest oil in the world. I mean, I'm just trying to figure out. I can't get past Libya, and it's just because it's like once that happened, I mean, you took out the strongest, blackest, if you will, leader in Africa, and it's nothing's been the same.
Mm-mm. It's been
Am I
hard.
am I misreading that?
No, it's exactly what's happening. The country that you said mentioned had the highest standard of living on the continent of Africa.
Mhm.
The people were guaranteed a monthly, what do we call it, guaranteed income in a lot of places, $1,000 a month, the equivalent to $1,000 a month, just given to them from the government. But there was also the continental projects that were being proposed, the revolutionary Pan African projects that were being suggested by Libya, the establishment of a telecommunications grid, the establishment of a currency for the continent, a continental currency, and uniting of the continent. There was a lot of things that were happening there. The country and the government there trained the liberation forces and for the frontline states in Southern Africa. I mean, there was just and also just basically standing up to, because Muammar Gaddafi was a protege, so to speak, of the revolutionary Egyptian president, the first president of Egypt.
Yeah.
Nasser. And so
Mhm.
there was a lot, and then just going off of what I think that you even mentioned some of this in the beginning of the the moves and the for Africa to become united and anti-decolonization. That was really what was behind. These were the motives behind the Organization of African Unity, and and he was also staunchly anti-Zionist,
Mhm.
the state of Israel. So it was a lot there. And then, like you said, anti-AFRICOM warning.
Well,
What
but
AFRICOM meant.
anti-Zionist. I mean, when you look at the revolutions of the world, and that's why I wanted you here today, because we depend upon Africa. We keep seeing Africa as this continent that my father often says, Nefa, we've got to turn the paradigm around. Africa is not our. They're not our. We are indebted to them. They're not indebted to us. We just continue to rape them. They're the creditor, we're the debtor.
Well, I agree with you in a lot of ways. However, as a revolutionary Pan Africanist myself, and seeing that the condition of our people and the
Mhm.
relationship that our people have within the United States, The United States is a settler colony. People forget it because it's so old, and they've done everything else to make us part of the feature of a settler colony. Colonization is to establish yourself as an independent nation, separated from. Is that our people here were brought, kidnapped from the continent of Africa, and hold interests that are not in line with what the interests, what the benefits that the U.S. in general and the ruling class get from Africa. We're most of us are poor in here, and we got to struggle to get whatever we get, and they'll stick Africa, the militarized police on us, just like they stick AFRICOM on on Africa, and that we're not really as a result, as a feature, an inherent feature of the United States, we're not able to identify or be taught about our identity as extending before the transatlantic slave trade, and also going from that time up until now. What is the history of us in terms of transcontinental connections and our resistance to imperialism? And there are many, and that those should be our source of identity, and realizing that we're not their interest. Our interest as a people is not the same, is more in line with those who are being targeted by imperialism, like the people of Haiti and all across Latin America and wherever African people have been scattered through this process of enslavement and taken kidnapped from Africa. So I agree with you. Is just that we also, I don't do the we thing. I think that we and even as the article we talk about, is that we end up, we have a role to play and in trying to and needing to turn around the role that AFRICOM in itself, and just imperialism in general, because AFRICOM is just one aspect of neocolonialism on the continent. There's other forms of it, and then we have a role to play. The Congressional Black Caucus, that's supposedly working for the interests of Black people, and it doesn't just say Black people in the United States, and we know that it's had the history, and it was considered once the conscience of the Congress. And that played a role in beating back and challenging apartheid, South Africa, and doing all kind of things that were that extended beyond benefits for just Black people in the United States. Now we don't see that.
Well, it's corporatized, right? I mean, you're talking of the Black Caucus of the Augustus Hawkins and the John Conyers and Ruth Stokes and Ron Dellums and that's a whole, and Shirley Chisholm. That was the first iteration, right? I mean, Ossie Davis opened their first dinner, right? It's not the man, it's the plan.
Right.
Now, I mean, but I think that's where we are all at a crossroads, and that's where I do say we, because we're all mixed up in these projects. And I think that's why it's important for us to be connected. That's why I wanted to talk with you about Africa today, because we don't talk about it enough, and yet we absolutely depend upon it. I mean, just all day, every day. I mean, we depend upon it, but we don't know. I mean, and now the heads of AFRICOM are Black, right?
The heads of AFRICOM are Black. The heads of the country. I mean, after formal colonialism on the continent was, then that's what that's a feature. The main feature of neocolonialism is that it has all the trappings of independence. You got Black heads of states. That's what we call the comprador class. It's the counterpart to comprador class right here. That's the ones who benefit from Africa. The rest of us don't.
But no, I put a pin in that because I want you to expand upon that, because Black faces in high places have been confusing to us, right?
Right.
Because I have to let people know, when Reverend ran for president, he ran as an unreconstructed progressive who was pushing for an African policy. The ANC used to stay at our home when they were considered the terrorists. And so calling for the freedom of, not only calling for Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu's freedom and everyone else who was imprisoned, but wait a minute, Winnie is she's been being imprisoned, and only God knows what was happening to her. Okay. You had to call for that, and you had a responsibility. If he was going to run, you had to run that way, right? We don't do that anymore. And so my question for you then, and this is not, I'm not talking about my dad here. I'm talking about where we have been historically, right? And because that's not what we have now. We have people signing on to the Colonial Project because, in fact, I remember when President Zuma went to apologize to Gaddafi because they held the dam on NATO going in on Gaddafi.
Yeah.
But when President Obama called, President Zuma said, "My brother, look, we need to get in there." President Zuma changed the South African vote. They went in, and Gaddafi told them, "Look, I knew the jig was up because I kind of began to see what was happening with our son in the United States." He said, "And it's okay." And Zuma, you could see he was devastated. He said, "I never thought it was going to play out this way." He said, "But Gaddafi predicted this, right?" He said, "No, it's going to play out this way." And I have, the record will reflect what I've done. So don't you worry about it. Now you keep up with the fight down there. And, and that is, I could cry when I think about it. Because when I think about what we conquered, he died. I mean, just, I was like, whoa. Because they passed Hillary Clinton that note and she said that. And I said, this is so cold. So, I mean, you got to help me to understand what is the pushback against Russia? Russia, 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 all the time, Netfa. what?
Yeah, it's Russia and China.
Yeah. What's the pushback?
Mm. So, if it's, and it's not just in Africa, but it's in Africa, like we said, the access and influence, and the part of the, I can't remember what's the beginning title, the pursuit, the ruthless and desperate pursuit, the
The
desperation part.
ruthless and desperate pursuit.
Right. I gotta remember my own.
That's why I said, let me refresh your memory.
Right.
You were like, it's hot off the presses. I'm like, not a problem.
Right.
But no, but I mean, but
But
why is it ruthless and desperate?
mhm. It's
Why?
because the United States, and I know you devil's advocate, you know a little bit about us already, and you interview all kind of people laying this out. But is that the influence of the West is waning around the world? That they've inherited, the legacy comes from, and their role in the world is one of domination and pillage and plunder and concentration of wealth, and they depend on all the raw minerals of the world and the markets of the world. Now there's a multipolarity happening. There are strong economies that are even stronger. China's economy is even stronger than the U.S. Clearly, Russia's economy is quite strong enough to even withstand all the attempt they've been trying to do through the proxy war in Ukraine and whatnot, and then and withstand sanctions and everything. They level all of these things against all of these countries, but the other countries of the world are realizing, well, there's another force, world powers. There's economic, trade agreements and different things that could be had if we look east, and we don't have to be subject, and they're bilateral. We don't have to be subject. We don't have to think you're going to put some sanctions on us, or you're going to invade us if we even go, do anything even more radical than just some trade agreements. That's not what happens. Russia is not, and China is not doing any of that. And so as the world, and you see formations like the BRICS formation. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, and China. China and South Africa. And so, and these are economic formation blocks. There's a re-emergence of what was known as of the non-aligned movement countries, where at the time it meant they weren't aligned with either the Cold War formations. And so they're saying, well, we want to realize our own interests as the global South that's formerly colonized, and our right to do, to have relationships with either one if we choose to, or to kick them out and do whatever. That was why it was called the non-alignment. Now, in the United States counts as any country, or that is leaning toward, or tries to lean toward those others as wanting socialism or communism, or in this sense, since they can't really do that because a lot of the countries are, let's keep to Africa, are doing both, are actually still beholden and serving the interest of Western capital through and relationships and agreements, got AFRICOM in their country and everything else, but they're also making agreements, trade agreements with, and other infrastructural project agreements through like China's Belt and Road Initiative and things like that. And when it comes to Russia, because you asked about Russia in particular, they a lot of at least some of the countries when they can will make alliances with Russia, particularly well, one Russia also has wheat and things like that you and that and also military uh, projects and cooperations where they're trying to fight these extremist elements. Which I don't know if I got to the point. Really, is the responsibility as when they flourished was because the United States attacked and destroyed Libya, and then
Mhm.
that what put them across the whole Sahel from all the way to from southeast southern east of Africa, all the way down to Somalia and across the Sahel, all the way to West Africa, where you're hearing like Boko Haram and Al Shabaab and these formations. They the robbing and the what do you call it? The looting of the
Mhm.
armory, the very sophisticated armory of Libya gave weapons, supplied weapons and strength, and also the violent extremist ideology just went across the continent of Africa. Something I can't imagine the United States intelligence could not predict. I don't think that they could not predict it. They knew what was happening, and it didn't really matter. And it served a purpose. Now they can come in and say, "Well, we're here to, fight these forces," and they want us to forget. And so you have forces in Libya that are not revolutionaries, that are
Mhm.
like for example, Khalifa Haftar, who's doing, who's working with the Russians.
Mhm.
You have the new countries, the Sahel states, the Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, who just kicked out the French and are kicking out AFRICOM, working with because AFRICOM and the French Foreign Legion have been ineffective in stopping, and doing anything about terrorism. They just, everything is just this military solution. There's no end in sight to these things. And so they said, well, we're going to invite the Russians in, who seem to have had some experience in this situation. At least even if you look at Syria or some other places where they actually, we don't get that information here. Were helpful in that regard. So we're going to invite them in. And the United States does not like that. You can't be inviting in our competitors on the global economy or anything else
Hold
in
on.
your country.
No, no, stop. Because see, you're reframing, and I don't want anyone to miss what you just said. Russia and China are our competitors. We've made them enemies in corporate media, right? But
That's
they're
right.
really competitors, right?
They're competitors too, but I think we need the regular people need to not accept, be told who our enemies are. They're
Okay.
not, that ain't. China's not my enemy. The masses of our people struggling to make a living, to survive on the ground. They're not their enemy. They're not the ones killing us and every 24 hours in the back. Like their police aren't here doing that. They're not implementing the policies that are mass incarceration and austerity and all that kind of stuff. In fact, there are the tax dollars of U.S. people that could be used to give us health care and waive the student debt and all that kind of stuff is used to undermine and to fight and to build the military industrial complex and to fight Russia and China. And you would think that Russia or even China is a threat and somehow a physical threat to the United States, but it's the U.S. that has the Indocom
Mhm.
surrounding China and doing military exercises off there, all around the coast and in against threatening North Korea and all those kind. And then we'll report when something happens that they can report as a response, as an aggression. Then they'll report it. And people here just don't. The press here does such an awful job of letting people understand the context and what's happening. The complexity of these things. They made such a big thing out of that balloon coming. They're flying stuff all over in violating the air, the what you call airspace and all that stuff,
Airspace.
these countries, on the regular. And so when Africa, and as we think we just talked about, when Africa can get itself together, and there was a time where neocolonialism was so firmly entrenched on the African continent, besides for a few places, you had Libya, and then you had even the threat that they of of in Zimbabwe of retaking land and redistributing it, not just, and it's so misinformed. Like they made it sound like they just taking white people land and kicking them out the country, whatever. They were taking excess land that wasn't being used. They were saying you can't have more than some, your plot can't be with so much, and the people have to have access. And they embarked on a fast track land reform. I don't want to get off on another thing, but I wanted to say there was only we didn't really see where Africa could read that decolonization project that began with Nkrumah and all of the other revolutionaries and Sekou Touré and Nasser and Patrice Lumumba and all that. We didn't know where that was going to come from. Now there have been, and then also with AFRICOM all over, that new thing, there were a set of coups d'etats, military coups, people trained by the French Foreign Legion in Africa, the France's persistent neocolonialism through this CFA franc, that this imposing of a currency on their colonies and all that made a growing antipathy. Not just the currency, but there's a whole number of robbing the minerals, like we said, and all that, like uranium, and made an antipathy get on the ground against France. So they started, and that growing antipathy, once those some military leaders got into their head, well, we're going to kick out France. We have to.
You're saying Burkina Faso, Mali,
and Niger.
And there's been this big hullabaloo about that. But because I was hearing about this, well, I guess we were in France in 2019.
Yeah.
Because many people don't know that after these nations were freed from colonialism, quote unquote, France still controlled their money.
That's right.
They were like, no, we don't want the franc. And now the petrodollar is no longer supreme in OPEC. Saudi Arabia said, no, we're going to use more than the petrodollar. We're going to go to the BRICS too. We're going. Right. So
all this is falling apart.
Things fall apart. Well, but I think that's why there's you keep saying I keep going over here, but there's so many branches to this NETFA, and so you got to come back here, on the regular to break this down, because we need to understand. So when we're trying to tell people, no, we need to relate to Africa and Africans in the diaspora, because as long as Africa is weakened, we're all weakened. When Africa gets strong, we get strong. I'm all with the foundational American thing, because we built this country. It's got a lot of flaws, but we built it, and I want my piece of it. But I know I'm a child of Africa as well. And so as an African American, I remember one of the first times I heard, and it made me swell up with pride. We went to Uhuru Kenyatta's inauguration, and what was wonderful, you had President Kaunda, you had all of the legendary freedom fighters who were still alive at that time. They were there paying homage to his father, Jomo Kenyatta, right? And that was wonderful to see. And the person who got the loudest cheers when we were brought into the stadium, Reverend got a lot of cheers too, because people, all Africans respect so much what Black people have done in the United States. But Mugabe, the people went crazy, because the deal that he cut with the British was a deal that Mandela did not cut. Mandela said, give me my vote. We'll work the land out later. Mugabe said, no, I want my land up front. Because that's where the wealth is. That's where the mines are and all of that. And so I'm trying to get, and so now, and then you saw AFRICOM, they kept trying to wedge it in. And now they're finally there. What do you think? Because I only have 4 minutes left this time. You got to come back. I'm inviting you back next week, because I pledge, as much as we talk about the Middle East, and we should, because Africa,
they're connected.
They're connected, and they are the only place in the era of apartheid that you could not land and refuel a plane from South Africa on the African continent. You had to stop in Israel. It's important for people to know that. I think I want you to, we've got to help people to understand Africa and the nations they're in, because it's not just Africa. It's all these nations.
Right.
And I really want you to come back and explain to us what is going on with Kenya, right?
Yeah. Mm.
I mean, because we, of
Can,
course, our first black president, his connection to Kenya. I'm wondering if that's what brought Kenya into the I guess the NATO adjacent fold.
mhm.
I'm trying to.
It is.
Well,
There's a lot.
it's a lot. I mean, I know.
Yeah. Can we just end with the? But we want to
We
talk about.
end it any way you want to. You've got the runway. You got 5 minutes. Go.
Oh, 5 minutes. Oh,
Give
okay.
it to you. I'm gonna give
I
it to you.
thought
I'm gonna extend it
so.
out. Go.
So just one of the things that's a threat that they also don't know what quite to do about are those three countries mentioned, Burkina Faso and Mali, which also just recently. So we didn't really mention, and I forgot, this is my fault, that this article was basing the, well, you mentioned it when you read the beginning, the meeting of the African heads of head chiefs
African
of
chief.
defense,
Hmm.
and that this meeting that's been going on is also tied up with actually concern with things like the emergence of the Alliance of Sahel States, which also just had a meeting July 6th to formalize themselves as a confederation. Those three countries, they first formed that alliance in response to the threat that ECOWAS presented for the interests of the West. They now have formalized a confederation, which means it's actually an example of a Pan-Africanism, a reemergence of a Pan-Africanism that has caught, in terms of the embracing of it and the hopes of the entire continent. And so people are looking at them. They can't, just go and invade that, because the way that's happening, I'm sure they wanted to, but that's why they asked ECOWAS to do it first. It wasn't going to be a good look for something that's popularly embraced. Those coups that happen, the people embraced that. They were in the streets, even in Burkina Faso, where they've had a number of just at least suspected, we can't say they're confirmed, suspected attempts of some operation to go in and overthrow that military and Ibrahim Traore there. The people came out, and it almost reminded you of like when they got Chavez out and those kind of things, and said, no, that's not going to happen. This is our government, this is our process, and we're gonna do that. This is not, and they're kicking out AFRICOM, and they're in this alliance. So the confederation, part of the agreements is economic. It's not just military. They're renegotiating, re-examining, and renegotiating. Their intent is all the mining contracts. They're talking about how do we bring in refineries so that we can refine our own goods and not depend on them coming from outside after they take our raw minerals and then sell us back. This is the project there. And then how do we do things that are for the benefit of the masses of the people? Burkina Faso is the most impressive one, and probably because it has that legacy of the revolutionary Thomas Sankara that was so recent. And we know that Ibrahim Traore and all the leaders there mention Thomas Sankara a lot, and they talk about Pan-Africanism in the African continent, and then also working with other revolutionary forces around. They have Russia helping. They're looking toward Russia for cooperation. Should be the right of countries, and this is what we have to understand. The United States, when they go and do these things, it's not in our interest. The rights of countries to sovereignty and self-determination. If the United States wants to, they do. That's fine. You can't be dictating the terms of agreement there. We didn't even talk about Libya and how they're trying to stir things up there because of Russia there, and they're trying to. And so this is the desperation part, and because they only know militarism and war and domination, they're responding in that way. They can't match the infrastructural projects that China is putting in. They can't do that. They can't bring them in it, nor is in their interest to help infrastructure projects for self-sufficiency on the African continent. They can only do little band-aid things, using aid as a weapon, as they've done through things like the Agency of International Development and whatnot. Aid as a weapon, food, like bring you little food and feed you because and people don't realize we have. And so anyway, that's the thing there in Kenya. Kenya, and part of this, what they call non-NATO member type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really quickly that this is their way of expanding NATO into and out of the reach of and expanding it outside of just Western Europe. And it's really like briberies in some senses of it. So you become a non-NATO ally, which is what Kenya done. Kenya has made itself available to imperialism. at least the leadership, not Kenya and people. I want to make it's very important to make a distinction because the people are in the streets in Kenya trying to, get a new government but they've opened themselves to the more of the IMF World Bank type designs to exploit their country. They've made themselves available to be a tool in the occupation of Haiti and the blackface imperialism, as we call it in Black Lives for Peace, and then also in their fight the U.S. AFRICOM's stirring up stuff in Somalia, keeping that going so that they have a reason to be there. So that's where there's the touch on those things. But we can thank you for having me. We can there's a lot more to unpack.
No. I pledge to you. I want you to come back regularly, and because we need to continue to unpack this article. I want people to know. 1 minute, you got it.
Yeah, it won't even be 1 minute, but at the end of the article, notice the Black Alliance for Peace has organized, led the International Month of Action Against AFRICOM in October. October is the month AFRICOM was founded. We've been doing that every year for the last 4 years. I think this is the fourth one, or is it the fourth one coming up? And so we can talk about that later. And it's just trying to get forces around the world who oppose AFRICOM to do something to expose the nature of it and what it's done to the continent.
Well, I'm going to have you back. Netfa Freeman, how can we hear you on WPFW? And everyone, you can go to WPFW.org and listen to these shows. It's not confined to Washington. It just comes out of Washington.
Right.
At the podcast. How can we can go to WPFW.org?
Yeah, I think it's WPFM.org. I think it's FM because it's an FM station. But we come on every Tuesday from 9 to 10 a.m. right after right from 9 to 10 a.m. on WPFW 89.3 FM and the Eastern 9 a.m. Eastern time. You got to put time zones these days.
That's right, because we're on Central Time over here, hour earlier, so it's good. So we're not going to conflict. But I want people to know who you are. You do such magnificent work, and
thank you.
No, thank you. I'm always bugging you. That's what I do.
No, it's not a bug. It's an honor. It's an honor.
You never treat me that way. Blessings to you. Everybody coming up, let's talk about Trump at the NABJ. Wow.